Hi everyone, in this new chapter on sampling methods and estimation, it will be under chapter 18 for H2 students and is under chapter 12 for H1 students. In this video clip on either 18.1 or 12.1, I'll be introducing to you the population and some sampling methods. Now first, let me go through some of these important terms under this video clip. The first important term is this thing called population. Now, what is population? Population refers to a particular group of people or items from which the information is required. For example, the population could be referring to a class of 40 students. Or it could also be referring to the entire Singapore population. So population can be as small as only a few people, or it can be as large as really 10,000, 100,000 or millions of people. Now sample is another term that you must know. Sample is basically what we call a subset of the population. And why do we need to study this sample? Because in general, we have a problem in identifying every single person in the whole population. That means we are unable to actually access to every single member. So what we can do to simplify the situation is to take just a subset of this entire population to study. And sampling method is basically the process, it's basically the process or method of drawing a sample in order to make statistical inference. Basically, it means that we actually have an entire population which we want to say study the IQ, the average IQ of the people in this population. So what we can do is that we carry out a sampling approach to actually capture a subset of this group. And this subset is what we call the sample. And of course, this whole thing is called the population. And why do we want to study this sample? We hope to use this results of this sample to actually make some generalization to this entire population. Okay? Now there are different methods of sampling approaches, some of which could be unsatisfactory, okay, because the members are not randomly chosen. Sometimes by convenience, you may just pick some people out, and this may not be satisfactory in our statistical analysis. Now there are generally 4 types of sampling method that you'll be learning in this A-level program. One of which is the random sampling. The second of which is what we call the stratified sampling. The third type is what we call the systematic sampling. And the fourth type is what we call quota sampling. Okay, we are going to study all these 4 different types of sampling approaches in this particular video clip as well. Now first, the random sampling. Now, what does random sampling do? And what is random sampling? Now, it says in your materials handout that says that simple random sampling is the basic sampling technique where we select a group of subjects for study from a larger group. Each individual is chosen entirely by chance, and every member of the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. So based on this random sampling approach, you have this population, you randomly select these people out, okay, and every member in this population has an equal chance of being selected. At the same time, every possible sample of a given size have a same chance of selection as well. That means, for example, I want to select a sample of 20 individuals. So every 20 individuals in the whole population has an equal chance of being selected. That's what it's trying to say. So each member of the population is equally likely to be chosen at any stage in this sampling process. And of course, clearly, what is the advantage? The advantage is that the collection of the data will be ensuring that there is a free from biasness. Okay, because everyone have an equal chance of being selected, there is no biasness towards who will be selected. At the same time, analysis of data is relatively easy. Why so? Because a lot of research has been made into this method of sampling approach, and thus there are mathematical formulas that you can use which allows you to make analysis on the results. Now, however, there are of course some disadvantages in this approach. The disadvantage is that it's difficult to identify every member of the population, especially if the population is large. Because in this method of random sampling, you must ensure that you have every single member of the whole population. Or else, you cannot randomly select from this entire group of people to actually make an analysis. Okay? So you must ensure, suppose for example, like a person like me, I want to actually study, say, using random sampling on the entire Singapore population. But I do not have every single members in this Singapore population. So unfortunately, I will not be able to use random sampling for the entire Singapore population. Okay? Now, let's look at the second disadvantage. The second disadvantage is that we may not be able to get access to some members who have been chosen for the sample. Okay? Unless there's a law that insists that the person that is being selected will actually have to answer the survey. Or else, even if you do a simple random sampling to pick the members to be selected for a sample, these members may not agree to being surveyed. And when that happens, you will actually not be able to ensure that it's really a simple random sampling approach. Okay? Now let's look at the second type of sampling approach that is called stratified sampling. Okay? Now, what is stratified sampling? Now, over in this stratified sampling approach, there are often factors which divides up the population into subpopulations. And we may expect the measurement of interest to vary among the different subpopulations. I give a simple example. Suppose we want to actually study when we want to actually introduce, say, a food store to a particular school. Okay? We may actually have to say, oh, this particular food store could be, say, a Malay store selling Malay food. Okay? So you might want to actually look at, say, the Chinese people, the Malay people, and say maybe the Indians, students, and maybe the teachers in the school, and maybe the staff in the school, which is non-teaching. So we may divide into different segments because we might believe that the food may cater to different groups of people. Okay? Their opinion of the food that is being introduced to the school may differ. Okay? So we try to actually divide the entire population into subgroups. Okay? And then what he says there is that we will then select a sample. We will then select a sample from each of these subpopulations. Okay? And this sample that we select has to be, in a sense, random. Okay? So we must ensure that every member in this subpopulation has an equal chance of being selected. Okay? And then after which, we will then do our analysis between what is the differences between the different subgroups. And that method is what we call stratified sampling. And in stratified sampling, you must ensure that every member in the population will belong to one of the subgroups. Okay? And stratified sampling is obtained by taking samples, as I said, from each of these subgroups, and each subgroup, there is a name for it, is called a stratum. Okay? And from these results of the sample from each stratum, we are then going to analyze the data and then make inferences between the different subgroups. Now, what actually are the advantages of this method? The advantages is that it focuses on important subpopulation but ignores irrelevant ones. Why do we say that? Because we believe, for example, that the different groups of people in the school may influence the results of the data. So we want to actually find out whether do the Chinese feel the same way of the type of food, or do the Indians feel the same way of the type of food. Okay? And it improves the accuracy of estimation, okay, as well as its efficient. Okay? Why is that so? Because if you actually do simple random sampling, you may actually result in a situation out of randomness, pick people that are from the non-teaching staff. Because out of randomness, you do not know who you are going to pick. So, but if they use computer to generate out, it may turn out that you have more people who are from non-teaching staff. Although that actually comprises a small percentage of the entire school population. By using stratified sampling, we are fair in the different groups. For example, if the Chinese comprises, say, 40% of the school population, then when we sample, we will actually ensure that the number of people that we are sampling from this group is also 40% of the entire sample size. That means if you're going to pick 100 people from this school population, we must ensure that 40 of them comes from Chinese, because Chinese make up 40% of the population. For example, Malays may pick up, say, another 40%. Then we will ensure that we pick another 40 Malays from this entire sample. Okay? So that will ensure that whatever you draw from the different groups will be representative of the entire population based on the strata. Okay? And what is the disadvantage? The disadvantage is that it can be difficult to select relevant stratification variables. Okay? Especially when you are not familiar with the population. Imagine if you actually, as a statistician in Singapore, is being asked to carry out a survey in another country. You do not know what actually are the factors that influences the results. And so you may not be able to divide into strata. I just give a quick example. Suppose in Singapore, say, we want to study maybe the salaries of people in Singapore. We may actually have to divide into gender. Okay, the males and the females. Why is that so? Because in Singapore context, the males will have to do national service and they will have 2 increments more than the ladies. So because of that, we have to divide into the strata. But for a person who doesn't know about this, may actually not be able to know why should we divide into gender in this case. So it's important to be able to identify the relevant variables. Okay? And it's also not useful when there's no homogeneous subgroups. What do I mean by that? That means that among the Chinese, if everyone thinks differently in general, then it's useless to stratify by the different subgroups in this manner. Okay? Just like if you actually going to divide, okay, a population into the various subgroups. Okay? The reason is that because you believe within each subgroup they think similarly. So if within this group they all think differently, then it's pointless to use stratified sampling. We might as well use simple random sampling. Okay? And of course, clearly stratified sampling is more expensive than the simple random sampling. Why is that so? Simple. Because of the fact that in stratified sampling, you must divide according to strata. So you must know basically for each member of the population which group do they belong to. Whether they belong to Chinese, Malays, Indian students, or they are teachers, or they are staff in the school. Okay? So this will be added resources for the researcher. Also, another disadvantage is that it requires accurate information about the population or introduces bias. Okay? An example would be that suppose I'm going to divide a population by the housing type. Okay? And then identify every member in the population into the various housing type. Okay? But if your information or your data is not accurate, some people could have moved from this group to another group. So what you actually draw will now be not as accurate as before. So you must ensure that it's accurate, okay, in this division. Okay? That is about stratified sampling. Let's look at the third type of sampling approach, which we call the systematic sampling. Okay? Now, what is systematic sampling? Systematic sampling is a random sample whereby a starting point is chosen and then the items are picked at regular intervals from the population, and each item has an equal chance of being selected. Okay? So I'll give an example. Suppose we have a population size of n. And our sample size is small n. Okay? Small n. That means we want to pick a sample of size small n from a population of size capital N. So these are all the people in the population. Okay? So we are interested in picking a sample of size small n. So what we will do is that we will use this thing called sampling interval. And sampling interval is given by the capital N over small n. I'll give a simple example. Suppose capital N is 1000, small n is say 20. Okay? So if you use this formula, you'll get 50. This is what we call the sampling interval. So that means that among the first, say, 50 individuals in the entire population, we are going to select one person out of this group. And that person that we select is going to be random. Suppose you are randomly pick a fifth person in this group. Then after that, you are trying to identify the next person that is to be in a sample. That will be the 55th person. Okay? And then go on to the 105th person. Okay? So every 50th person, you are going to select the member out. And by doing that, you will actually be able to select a sample of size 20. Okay? So it's still random in the sense that the first 50 people, you're going to randomly pick a person. And by picking that person, the rest becomes quite clear. Suppose you pick the first person, then you'll pick the 51st, 101st, and so on and so forth. So subsequent individuals will be picked according to which person you pick over here. Okay? That is systematic sampling. And the advantage is that the sample is more evenly spread out over the population. For example, you have to do a systematic sampling for the school, and then you might want to actually divide the students into the various classes. So by doing systematic sampling, you are ensuring that maybe the various classes will have some representatives. Okay? And furthermore, the other advantage that is easier to conduct than other types of sample, because you just have to identify an individual here, subsequent individuals will naturally be either selected or not selected, quite clearly. The disadvantage is that there is a bias caused by the effect of periodicity of the population. Okay? For example, you might actually have a class list, okay, from class 1 to class 20, for example. Okay? Suppose the girls are in the class list first, followed by the boys. If you always pick, say, the third person in each class, then you will not be able generally to get any boys in the representative sample. So because of the periodicity, you may lead to a situation when a particular group is not naturally being chosen. Okay? And the other disadvantage is that it's not always possible to arrange the members of the population if the sample size is large. Okay? Imagine if the entire sample size is large, it's very difficult to list them down in this manner. And finally, the quota sampling. Now, what is quota sampling? Now, quota sampling is actually a method of sampling widely used in opinion polling and market research. The interviewers are each given a quota of subjects of specified type to attempt to recruit. Okay, for example, an individual might be told to go out and select 20 adult men 20 adult women, 10 teenage girls, 10 teenage boys, so that they could interview them about their television viewing. So this type of situation, that means the person who actually asked the interviewer to do the interviews actually do not really specify who you want to pick. Just basically ensuring that a certain segment is being chosen, like 20 adult women. I don't really bother exactly how you're going to select the 20 adult women in a sense. So it suffers from a number of methodological flaws, the most basic of which is the sample is not a random sample. Okay? And therefore, the sampling distribution of any statistics are unknown. Okay? The advantage, of course, we're quite clear why people do that, because the cost is low. Okay? And it's faster to gather the information just for opinion purpose. I just want to gather some people out and find out what is the opinion of a particular product. And it does not require a sampling frame. That means it does not require the list of people in the entire population. Now, the disadvantages is that it's not a good representation of the population as a whole as compared with other types of sampling. Why is that so? Because when you select 20 adult men, 20 adult women, are you certain that the adult men and adult women are in the same ratio in the entire population? Nobody knows actually. Okay? And the other disadvantage is that the method is biased, as the interviewer may choose those who are easier and more willing to be interviewed. Okay? So I hope that this particular video clip allows you to actually understand more into the different sampling methods that is required. Okay? Thank you.